Welcome, everybody, to the ADHD podcast, where we talk about everything at the intersection of neurodivergence and fatherhood. I'm your host, Braden Young of Empower ADHD Solutions, and I'm flying solo today because I'm going to be telling my origin story. I'm a huge comic book nerd, so it made it really hard not to call that a superhero origin story, but I digress, because this isn't really a superhero origin story. It's more of a legacy origin story. I've talked a little bit about this in previous episodes, but I want to do a deep dive here because there are a lot of important messages in my story. And I do want to say up front, this episode talks about rejection, abuse, and some complicated fatherhood relationships. So if that's a tender subject for you, take care of yourself as you listen, please. My story of fatherhood started long before I ever became a dad. It actually began when I was 2 years old. The first impression I have of any kind of father really is when my mom took me to meet my biological dad before she married my stepdad so that she could give him the opportunity to be an active part of my life. But instead of taking up the charge, he simply said, "I can't," and ran away as fast as he could. Even if I was too young to really understand what was going on, my nervous system still remembers that. When your first imprint of fatherhood is of someone walking away and rejecting you, that sticks with you. Later, when my mom married my stepdad, he became the closest thing I had to a father, but it was complicated. I always felt like more of an annoyance than a son to him. When my sister was born, she was treated like a princess, and I always just felt like I was constantly in the way or unwanted. On top of that, I had undiagnosed ADHD, which meant I was emotional. I had big reactions. I struggled with organization, and I struggled with regulation. In a house with alcoholism, diabetes, OCD, and anger issues, there really wasn't much room for a sensitive, dysregulated kid. A lot of times when his blood sugar would dip, or when my room wasn't clean enough, or my clothes weren't folded perfectly, his anger would come out on me, often violently, but just enough that it never left a mark, just enough that I could never prove it. And when you're already labeled as over-emotional, when you try to say something is wrong and no one sees it, you start questioning your own reality. You start thinking that maybe you're the problem. Then when I was 17, something shifted. We got into another fight. I honestly don't even remember what it was about, but like so many times before, it escalated. And this time, instead of shrinking back and cowering, I fought back. He punched me in the nose. It almost broke. I ran out of the house with blood all over my shirt, and I drove to a friend's house and called the police. I didn't press charges. I just wanted it to stop. So I had an officer go to the house and give him a stern talking to. When I came home 2 days later, my stepdad sat me down and told me that he was proud of me for standing up for myself, that he respected me more. 2 weeks later, he died of a heart attack while I was at an overnight party that he had spent over an hour trying to convince my mom to let me go to, even though he knew there would be alcohol at the party. The last thing he ever said to me as I was walking out the door to go to the party was, "Don't embarrass me, son." For a long time, I didn't realize how much that sentence shaped me. I lived like it was my job to not embarrass anyone, to perform just well enough, to not be emotional, to not be too much, to not say too much. But this story isn't only about rejection, because while one father left and another was complicated and often harmful, my mom stepped in to fill in the gaps. She led my Cub Scouts groups. She became the president of the PTO at my school. She surprised me by pulling me out of school early one day and taking me to an NBA game. RIP Seattle Supersonics. That wasn't just a game. That was being chosen. She was my rock. She showed me what it meant to consistently have someone's back. I didn't grow up with a blueprint for engaged fatherhood, but I grew up with a blueprint for love, and it came from my mom. Then I became a dad. The first time wasn't with my son. It was when I stepped into my stepdaughter's life when she was 2 years old, much the same as my stepdad did. And I knew one thing very clearly. I loved the hell out of that girl, and I did not ever want to treat her the way I had been treated. So I braided her hair, I took her to the park, I played horsies with her, I volunteered at her class every week, I showed up. But here's the part that's really hard to talk about. I was still undiagnosed in my ADHD. I was still carrying a lot of anger. I was still living under that "don't embarrass me" umbrella. And sometimes that came out. It never got physical, but I raised my voice, and I said a lot of things that I regret. And some of those words stuck. Some of them hurt her in ways I wish I could undo. We've talked about it. We've worked through most of it. There's been repair, but breaking cycles isn't clean. It's an interruption, and sometimes you interrupt imperfectly. When I was 35, I was diagnosed with ADHD, and suddenly I had a language for my nervous system. It didn't excuse my past, but it changed my future. I started understanding my anger, my rejection sensitivity, my overwhelm, and I became more intentional as a father. There's one more part of this story I didn't fully understand until just last year. When I was 13 or 14, my mom and stepdad asked me if I wanted him to officially adopt me. I said yes, of course I did. He was the closest thing I had to a dad. I assumed it had happened. I assumed my last name had legally been changed to Young. Then last year, when I went to get my passport, I found out there were no adoption records filed. My name had never officially been changed. So I had a choice. Change everything back to my birth name so that my ID matched my birth certificate, or legally change my name to Young. I looked at my son. He knows his last name is Young. If I changed mine back, he would wonder why our names were different. So I made a choice. I didn't change my name to match my stepdad. I changed it to match my son. Even if my stepdad couldn't officially adopt me, I chose to adopt myself for my son. When I signed those papers, something in me shifted. I was no longer carrying someone else's legacy. I was building my own. There's one more twist to this origin story. A few years after my stepdad passed away, I found a trunk in the closet. It was full of comic books. His comic books. He'd been a huge comic book nerd as a kid, just like I was, but he never told me. I loved comic books so much, and I still do. That could have been our bridge. That could have been the thing that brought us closer. I didn't feel anger when I found those comic books. I felt sad because that was a part of himself he kept hidden. And if he had just opened up, things could have been different. At the beginning of this episode, I joked about it being a superhero origin story. And in comic books, origin stories usually start with pain. But what makes the hero isn't the tragedy, it's the choice that follows. My biological father said, "I can't." My stepdad said, "Don't embarrass me." My mom showed me what choosing someone looks like. And now I get to choose. I get to decide what they will hear. They will hear, "I'm proud of you. You belong, and you don't have to earn my love." And if you're a dad listening to this, you get to choose too. You get to decide what your kids will someday say your voice sounded like in their head. You get to decide whether they discover you from a trunk in a closet or whether they know you now. So here's my challenge to you. Let them see the nerdy parts. Let them see the emotional parts. Let them see the imperfect parts. Tell them you're proud of them, out loud. Apologize when you mess up. Stay in the room when it gets uncomfortable. Break the cycle, even if you interrupt it imperfectly. This isn't a superhero origin story. It's a story about a dad who stays, a dad who chooses, a dad who decides the legacy changes here. And that's a choice every one of us can make. Thank you all for listening to my story. Please be sure to like, follow, comment, and click all the things, and we'll see you next time.